I'd just like to next to invite Steve up and say thank you very much for agreeing to come and speak for us. So if you could hop on, the presentation comes up down there, Steve. So.
You're welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd just like to say sustainability is a big issue. This is an entirely recycled presentation when I gave it the NORAC AGM a couple of weeks ago. So my apologies go out to anyone who had to endure that. It's more or less identical, I'm afraid. But nevertheless, repetition is always good. So this is a really quick run-through on what I think, what the land contamination industry thinks that asbestos consultants really need to know when they're getting involved with land contamination assessments, specifically for asbestos. So what I'm going to do is just run through some key points which should help, ultimately, asbestos management practitioners are making some potentially very costly mistakes. To counterbalance that, I should say I have had opportunity on a number of occasions to make direct criticisms of various parts of the geo-environmental sector as well, so it's not all about asbestos consultant bashing. Okay. So just briefly to set the scene, industry does need guidance. The asbestos industry absolutely could understand better what to do and what not to do when it comes to assessing land contamination for asbestos to avoid contractual liabilities and in particular professional indemnity insurance claims. That's something I'm working on with NORAC, Colette Willoughby, Sarah Mason and others, and hopefully we'll be able to produce some really nice practical guidelines that people can follow to protect their business, bottom line, at the end of the day. It all hinges on the issue of competence, and I don't need to tell you guys what you need to know and be in order to demonstrate competence in the field of asbestos. But land contamination has its own issues relating to competence, and I think it's important to understand how to bridge the two in order, again, to protect against significant liabilities. I'm going to touch on surveying, so-called surveying land for asbestos contamination, linking in with HSG 264, HSG 248, and geo-environmental guidance, issues related to sampling and soil logging, and then soil analysis and implications for UCAS. And then a little bit on hazard and risk assessment. So looking at the framework that exists within HSG 264 and 227, compared to what is in and has been in since 2016 car soil industry guidance and the decision support tools that were published alongside that guidance. And then lastly, the thorny issue of the description of ACMs and the consequences of getting that description wrong in terms of licensing status of work with asbestos contamination in soil. Very big potential issues that can arise there. So what are the risks and the liabilities? Well, if you find yourself in the middle of a claim, a client has decided to sue you for professional negligence, if you can't demonstrate that you've followed industry good practice, you might as well put your hand up and pay out, yeah, because you have to follow good industry practice, not best, but good, in order to demonstrate that you're doing the job that the client has requested you to do. Okay, good industry practice is key here, as well as relevant standards, British standards, and so on and so forth. So those potential claims can lead to very significant financial awards against. If, however, you aren't able to demonstrate that the staff that have been employed on that particular project are not competent in terms of land contamination, you may actually find that your company is technically uninsured. I certainly know that I have to provide my insurers with information relevant to my environmental competence in order to get asbestos and land contamination insurance in place at a reasonable cost. So what is competence? Well, we all know what competence means in the asbestos management sector. You've got to have practical experience, you've got to have training, information, instruction, training, professional qualifications. But when it comes to land contamination, the requirements of competence are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, the NPPF. So yes, you have to have relevant qualifications, you have to have lots of experience in dealing with very specific types of contamination, and there's lots of types of contamination apart from asbestos that we can find in the ground. But you also have to be able to demonstrate that you're a member of a professional organisation. And the reason that's key is because you then have to abide by a professional code of conduct, which means that you don't overstep the boundaries of your technical and professional competence. Yeah? So membership of a relevant professional organisation that recognises land contamination as a specific area of expertise. So competence in land contamination requires you, amongst many things, to have a detailed knowledge and in-depth understanding of all of the regulatory and guidance framework that applies to land quality assessment. You know, British standards, European standards, various industry and regulatory guidance published by industry, published by regulatory agencies such as the Environment Agency, both for investigating and assessing land contamination as well as implications for waste. And there's two very different regimes that operate there. You know, human health risk assessment for landcon, totally different to assessing characteristics of waste for treatment, landfill disposal, reuse, under a materials management plan and so on. I really would suggest that you don't do what Richard Branson says you should do. You know, if you get an amazing opportunity, your client wants you to price for this big job, take the job and then figure out how to do it afterwards. That's a recipe for disaster. Yeah, absolute recipe for disaster. And I know, speaking from my experience over the last 5-6 years working in the field of expert witness, I see a lot of absolute disasters where somebody said, yeah, I'll have it, it's got the word asbestos in it, it's mine, and then try to figure out how to do it. When in actual fact, they don't know what they don't know. Yeah, complete recipe for disaster. So, asbestos surveys and land contamination, how to demonstrate incompetence. Okay, the first thing I look for in a land contamination assessment, if the asbestos consultant said, I've done this survey of land fully in accordance with the requirements of HSG 264. That's a big red flag. The alarm bell's going off. Why? Because 264 says nothing about land contamination investigation and assessment. Yeah? If you're using the algorithm that's in HSG 264, you're going to be making completely incorrect assessments of the level of hazard, which is there based on ACMs and buildings. Yeah? That is then going to lead you to make incorrect conclusions regarding risk. You're probably going to be calling the ACMs the wrong thing, and that then is going to make you make wrong calls regarding the licensing status of remedial works. HSG 248 does refer to land contamination, but it cross-references other geo-environmental guidance and standards. So not 264. Sampling and logging of made ground. Okay, I've seen this, an absolute horrendous error. You've got an asbestos consultant with a JCB digging a big hole and taking samples. And the report says that the sample comes from, in this case, 1 metre. Well, that was the depth of the hole. Well, where did the sample come from? 20 mil, 50 mil, 75 mil? If you say it comes from 1 metre and it's actually come from the top, the made ground, you could be then in the business of not being able to accurately describe the soil material where the asbestos is, and consequently somebody's going to make a massive overestimate of the amount of soil that has to be removed and sent to landfill at exorbitant cost. Okay? That could lead you in real hot water. In addition, I've seen examples of analysts calling soil dust. Soil is not dust. Dust is dust, soil is soil. If you're going to be examining and identifying asbestos in soil, you need that extension of accreditation to your UCAS. Do not use the HSG 264 algorithm. The car soil industry guidance that's been out since 2016 recognises, and HSE recognised, that asbestos in soil and made ground poses significantly lower risks of exposure to respirable fibres compared with the same materials in buildings. That's principally because we're dealing with material that's wet, and of course we're outdoors. Yeah? 264 and 227 will give you an overestimate of the hazard as well as the risk. So I strongly urge you to download the Joint Industry Working Group work category and receptor risk decision support tools from the CLARE website and understand how those can be used, one, to determine what the work category is, the licensing status, but secondly, how any works might impact adjacent or nearby sensitive receptors. That's the first page of the work category tool. And that's the first page of the receptor risk ranking tool. They ideally should be used together. Yeah, this one is really effective at enabling you to understand potential impacts on, for example, a school. If you're going to be digging up the soil on an industrial site next to a school, is that a good idea? Do we have to do the work in summer holidays, for example? Incorrect descriptions. Reg 2 CAR 2012 definitions do not apply for coatings, insulation, lagging, and AIB. If what we're seeing on site is not in a clearly identifiable original form. And what that means is it's possible for a trained and competent person to visually inspect the material on site, yeah, that's presumed to be an ACM, and see what it appears to be. Now, if it's not clearly identifiable original form, then you can use, or you should be using, the term loose fibrous asbestos or fibrous board. Ultimately, though, you have to refer back to the control limit to determine whether the work is going to be licensable or not. So Reg 2 for coatings, insulation and AIB set very strict requirements for calling work licensable. Whereas if we're dealing with loose fibrous or fibrous board, then it's the control limit. There's a lot of scope for people to trip up, and absolutely, I've just given you a couple of examples of some of those. We all know about the health risks from asbestos, yeah, absolutely, clear and present danger, but there are very, very significant commercial risks for getting it wrong, and it doesn't just apply to asbestos consultancies, it applies also to asbestos contractors who I've seen get it wrong big style. On a number of cases I've worked on recently. And it applies just as much to geoenvironmental consultants where they think they know about asbestos, but in actual fact they don't know what they don't know. So the key moving forward, I would argue, is one, ensure you've got competence. So that's either, you're working with competent people in your own organization, or you're working with competent people in another organization. Building a team. Kat talked about team building and working together, stop working in silos. Don't try and muddle through, because chances are I'll end up with your report on my desk and I'll be looking at a horror show of, a catalogue of errors. And that completely exposes your business to potential to being bankrupted if you're uninsured and facing a multi-million-pound claim. Absolutely not what you want to be doing. That's it, I'm afraid. I could go on. I think next time I'll talk about air monitoring, which is a whole issue in itself, and another example of where people can spend a lot of money and not quite get what you need.
Steve, thank you so much
Okay.
for that. Ed.